Okay, very good. It is 6:30 on Tuesday, February 4th, 2025. This is our regular scheduled committee meeting for the Northern Lebanon School District Board of Directors. I do call this meeting to order. We just have a couple of presentations today. So first off, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Messinger.
I think what we'll do is we're going to switch that.
Okay.
And we'll let you present first, and then you can go. Because Lee's with us all night. So,
Great.
yeah. Brad, welcome, Brad. Good to see
Yeah,
you.
thanks, Brad.
How's that? That better? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Good to see everybody again. Talking about tonight about funding some more of the high school project. And we're getting ready and geared up to do that here as we get in towards the end of the first quarter of the year. So on my handouts, many of you have hard copies. I have it up on the screen as well. Right now, I always have this colorful interest rate chart as page number 2. Kind of talks to you a little bit about the market and what's going on in the municipal bond world. I think a lot of people have seen that mortgage rates have gone up and things like that of that nature. But if you see the chart on the top, what that is a 30-year history of municipal bond rates. And the gray bars show the high and the lows. The red line shows the historic average, and the blue line shows you where we are today. So it's nice to see the blue line below the red. It's not as far below as it was when we first started all this, but it's still below. So the market and municipal bond market's functioning quite well. We've had couple transactions today, one tomorrow. Money's out there to buy these bonds, so that's a good sign for the market. So we'll hope it continues that way for the next couple months for you. The other charts just kind of show you the direction of the 10-year rate. If you go to the bottom chart, just scroll down a little bit more, please. It'll show you on the right, you can see things, they were trending upwards during the end of last year, beginning of this year, but they seem to be coming back down a little bit. So bottom line, market's still functioning quite well, and I would expect that you would receive some good interest rates on your next transaction. Page number 3 is just for you to remember. They show your gross principal and interest payments by fiscal year. You can see that sometimes it looks like some of the payments are a little wonky, but if you get to the far right, column 7, you've pretty much leveled out at about 5.8 million, and then it drops down a little bit after that in about 20 years from now to about 5 million. That's where you are today. This page also helps Leanne and I not only with budgeting, but also as we scroll to the bottom of the page, the next probably things you'll be hearing from us about is if we just go down a little bit more, that'd be great. There is what's called a call date at the bottom, and that shows the dates at which the school district has the option to refinance. And you'd only do so if you can save money. But hopefully over the course of many years, as those dates come closer, we'll be able to be in touch with you to refinance and hopefully reduce the payments. But those are a ways off, as you can see. That's still 5 years from now, 4 years from now when they start. All right, the next page is what we had put together. It kind of has it helped us kind of size and figure out how much money you need for the projects. It's a draw schedule. On the left, it shows the estimated uses of funds for the secondary school projects. And then as you move to the right, the different sources of funding. This bond issue is in column 9. It shows it occurring sometime in that April to getting you the money in April or May, about $9 million. That's what your borrowing capacity is now. We did a calculation. Leanne was great. She sent us your AFR so we could do that work. And there is also a line there talking about the use of cash towards that project. We have that in the 9 to 9.5 million range. Again, there are a lot of variables, how the money's spent, how much is spent, any things that come up during the course of the projects that could change this. But it gives you an idea of how you're looking to fund all this, the secondary school project, along with the bonds that we've done in the past. Page number 5 is the colorful chart that I've been showing you for years. It shows the different bonds that have been issued for the projects, this building here, the athletic facilities and the secondary school. The green and the red on the left, those interest rates have all been locked in. Again, those were mostly related to this building, the elementary school, and the athletic facilities. And as we get to the purple and blue, those were the last two that we did for the secondary school projects. They were both about 15 million. I think they worked out well. If you remember, the strategy there was if you borrowed 15 or million or less in a calendar year, you were able to invest the money and keep the earnings. And as you remember back in 23, 24, investment rates were much more attractive than they were during the pandemic. So that helped pay for some of the projects. The orange is the one that we're looking at now. That's about, as I mentioned, it's about $9 million. You can see the repayment on that, or what we estimate it to be. Those rates have not been locked in yet, while the other ones have. And you can see we're going to amortize that over about a 20-year period, 22-year period or so. And you'll notice some of the payments get a little bit bigger in the end. You might scratch your head and say, Brad, why are you doing that? Well, the reason we're doing that is that's when some of the other debts get paid off. And that helps minimize the budget impact. It's what we call a wraparound. We've utilized that in the past. And we think you'll settle out somewhere in the neighborhood of about $6.5 million for debt service. Leanne and I were just chatting. I think when we were at this point a year ago, we were thinking it was like 6.7 or 6.8. So that, it's going in the right direction. With that, I just did want to include in here, just so you have it, this is this borrowing capacity analysis. A lot of numbers on here. I get it, but it kind of gives the board comfort to know that you're operating within the laws and the Debt Act in Pennsylvania. You only can borrow up to a certain amount, and this is the calculation that does it. And you'll notice that as we get towards the end of 24-25, which is column number 3, in the pink, you'll notice a positive number. That was a number that we were running negative for a while. And it does seem like some different strategies have worked out, so we've gotten to the point here. This could be the last financing, depending on how things go. We were just talking about it a little bit earlier. You might need potentially a little bit more. We'll see how that all shakes out. And we have some strategies for that as well, because we may not need a full-fledged bond issue. There might be another way to go about getting those funds. The last page for you is kind of a timeline. I believe that authorization for us to work with Stock and Leader to get everything together was approved in January. So we've gotten that authorization. I just wanted to come and give you an update to see if you had any questions on this next financing, how we got to the number we got to, and things of that nature. The next action by the board would be in March on the 11th, where you would approve, if you remember, the parameters resolution. That's that big, thick document that Stock and Leader puts together to make sure you comply with state laws, federal laws, things of that nature, and set forth the parameters under which the transaction could take place. Right now, I'm looking at possibly a bond sale at the end of March. I've just targeted a date here, the 26th, and then you get your money by the end of April. That's kind of the timeline to getting the funds in place to the school district, so you can keep paying your bills. So I know many of you have been through this several times before. Just wanted to kind of review all those steps, and again, see if there's any questions. Or Leanne, did I miss something, or am I good?
No, I think you covered it all. Thank you very much, Brad.
I didn't even need my readers.
Yeah, I have one. What is actually maximum capacity that we can borrow this year
Okay.
coming up?
This 9 million is the max.
Is the max.
Okay. It's basically a calculation that's done every year after each fiscal year. You have to take your average revenues for the last 3 years. You have to take out one-time things, most notably ESSER funds. You can't count those. And then you have to do a calculation, average them, multiply them by 225%, and that's kind of the maximum amount that you're allowed to have of existing debt going forward. As time has gone on here, revenues have grown. You've been paying down your scheduled debt like you're supposed to, making your payments. So that's kind of why we've gotten to a point where we can, fund the rest of the projects with this bond. So every year that calculation will increase your capacity.
if we do need an extra bond, what will be our capacity?
So.
Hey, Ben,
that's a
could
good
you
question.
speak?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm
thanks.
sorry. If we do need an extra bond, what will be the capacity that we can
Sure.
have?
If you'd be kind enough to go to page 6 again. Okay, that's the landscape, the sideways page. What we did is if you look at the top, there's column numbers 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
3 is where we are today. 4 is what we project when you get into next school year. Okay, so that's after July 1 of 2025. We're projecting, if you look in the pink, you see there's another 7.5 million of capacity.
Okay.
That's what we project. And we've been projecting kind of conservatively, so I wouldn't be surprised if we were talking here in 6 or 12 months from now, that might be even a little bit more.
Thank you.
Okay. Hey,
Yeah.
thanks as always.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you very
Brad.
much.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. We also have tonight Mr. Umberger, and as he comes up, I'll talk a little bit about. So it's usually about this time of year I start to talk about some of the things that we've been able to um, do in the district in terms of kind of a mid-year report. This year, going to do it slightly differently. I asked for both the secondary and the elementary to come and report. Elementary is going to report this week. Secondary is actually going to report next month. And then I'm going to lay out some of the things as well as goals for next year. And we've been talking for a couple of years now about having goals sooner in the year so that we can focus our professional development over the summer and set goals for teachers. And when Director Nam comes and talks to me in the middle of the summer about what the board has discussed, the issue we have is we're kind of already started down the path by then. And so I think we are in pretty good shape. Tomorrow, we have a leadership meeting where I will be discussing with them. We'll be talking about a potential new curriculum template that I think will make a difference for us instructionally. We're going to be talking a little bit about some goals that I have already started to think about for next year. And we're also going to be talking about what I consider are to be the steps from the very beginning until the end, and then it's cyclical in nature for continuous academic improvement. And one of those pieces is data analysis. And I've asked Mr. Umber, because that's been something that they've worked considerably on this year, to talk a little bit about what they're doing. I think at some point I showed a very colorful data sheet with you, which he's going to, I think, show again. But he's going to give us an update on where that stands and how you guys are growing and learning and starting to talk about numbers and how that's impacting or potentially will impact what they're doing in our classrooms. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the honor to share some information with you of the work we're doing here in the district. And I'll go fast, and scratch the surface. Won't go too deep today. But as many of you know, you don't go anywhere unless you have data, because if you don't have data, you just have opinions. And we're working through that process of what does this data mean? What does it do for us? How do we know that we're getting our maximum output from the input we're putting into our students? So with that, one of the things we started off with was a comprehensive look at assessment. So what are we trying to accomplish? And there's a bunch of different ways that this chart in front of you takes into account. So not only are we looking at what the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania mandates in terms of standards, and we have to assess on our standards, and there are different ways to do that using different types of assessments. But there's also the point of how do we assess the skills that go with that? So there's two different ways to look at that. And you'll see a bunch from formative assessments to summative to diagnostics to progress monitoring. We have all of that going on, but that's a lot of information. But the first thing we had to do is understand what are our assessments, what are we doing with that, and what does that get us? Which leads us quickly to,
Could I just piggyback on that?
you sure can, sir.
I just, two that I really, none of that is not important. However, Two that have been an emphasis for us are benchmark assessments versus and understanding the difference between a benchmark assessment and a diagnostic assessment. A diagnostic assessment, and he's about ready to show you what we use for our diagnostic. A diagnostic assessment will tell you what grade level you are on, whatever that subject is that you're testing. So we give a math test, you're a fourth grade student, and it comes back at 4.7. That's good. That means you're at a fourth grade, like past halfway through the middle of fourth grade in a diagnostic. If it comes back at a 2.5, not only does it tell us that that student is below grade level, but it also gives information about where are the categories or what are the components that are causing that, okay? Versus a benchmark assessment where a benchmark does not go up and down like a diagnostic would. In other words, a diagnostic, if you answer questions right, it gets harder and harder and harder until you've hit your level, or it gets easier and easier and easier until it levels out. A benchmark assessment is specific to a set of skills that are the grade level standard, and that's what the state of Pennsylvania expects you to be able to master as a fourth grader. So those skills are the same questions no matter what level you're on. Obviously, if you're on if you have a diagnostic and you are a fourth grader and your level is a 2.5, in all likelihood, you are not going to do well on the benchmark, okay? But there are children that actually, because you're focusing on very specific skills and topics, can do well on a benchmark and still have an overall level that's below. Usually you wouldn't see that much of a gap, but it can happen. So that helps drive teachers in terms of what do they need to focus their instruction. So if I asked you all to give you a passage and said, okay, I need you to tell me what the main idea is. Depending on how this group does, then I understand, okay, they're getting what I'm teaching about main idea. Or if you guys aren't doing well with that, then I need to go back and revisit that. Or I might have a small subset. Like I feel like this side of the room would not be good at this. So we would have to go back and have a small group and we would have to work on that skill. And because they're such core assessments and what we're doing, I just wanted to add a little bit of information about those. We could talk about all of them, but and some of them will come up again when I talk further later. But those two are incredibly important to what we're doing.
No, don't be sorry. You helped explain the next slide a little bit, so we saved some time there. So one of the things that we implemented this year was taking on the diagnostic, and Dr. Messinger did a nice job explaining a diagnostic, drilling down, finding what skills they need, and so that we can get in there and provide some instruction in those skills and fill those in. Sometimes we like to refer to it, you're driving on the road, which is your standard, and you have some missing skills, which are like potholes. We want to fill the potholes in so that the road gets smooth and we're on our way with that. So we've done 3 different sessions of training with more to come on iReady. It is a monster, but it is a monster in the fact of it is a lot to learn. And the teachers have embraced it and done a nice job in learning it, but there's more learning to be done. It has so many resources for our teachers to use that we're only scratching the surface. So it's going to be a multi-year of how do we use this tool and how is it going to help us improve not only the data we get, but our students are ultimately the ones who are going to get what they deserve out of iReady. So that is one of the pieces. That's the diagnostic piece that we're delving into. So once we did that, we sat down with reading specialists and revised our assessment calendar. So if you think about all those assessments, we have to put it in some sort of a pattern that we can use throughout the year and use it strategically to drive some things. So we set it up on a calendar and what skills. So you can see on this chart, for example, kindergartners really focusing on letter names and letter sounds. That's the important part for kindergarten. And then as we go up in grade levels, the skills change and what we're doing. Some of them we use as universal screens. You can see our diagnostics are on there, our benchmarks are on there. And we've also developed our progress monitoring and just implemented that in January. So all those pieces are coming together and we're setting the stage for how do we do all this. So that kind of gives you like, almost like, think of it, since we just had a little talk about construction, think of it, that's the architect and there's the blueprint. So now we have the blueprint. Now we get to the actual part of, once we run these, what do we get? And that's where you get that colorful chart there. So then we take every piece of data and it goes into a chart and it's color coded, and we have color coding that means certain things. We develop each one, and then we go into the process of, okay, what do we do with this data? How do we take this and actually implement it to making a difference for each student? So we take each part and drill it apart, and then we go, okay, who's going to help with this skill? Who's going to take this on? Oh, this student's doing really well. How can we enrich them and take them beyond what they are? So using Gary's example of 4.7, we may need to enrich and go above that as well. So it's not only designed to be for students who are below, but it's designed for all students so that all students get what they need with that. And some of that is, a lot of numbers and a lot of number crunching. And, there are heads that tend to explode sometimes with overwhelmed with the amount of information, because now we have a lot of information and we have to figure out what are we going to do with that information.
Can I interrupt real quick?
You sure can.
So this, if you go back up.
Yep.
So this is this representative of a single student?
No, that
Oh,
is,
wow.
that's about
Great.
10 students there.
Okay, okay,
10 students out of a grade level.
okay. I see. Okay, okay.
And you can see on the end, okay, that the BOY would be beginning of the year. That's a composite score of the assessments that we gave at the beginning of the year. With each, whether you're advanced, proficient, basic, or below basic, that gets averaged together to a composite score.
Great.
And then same thing for the end of trimester 1. And then from a teacher standpoint, typically you would sort that by your class to help you determine which kids have, how your groups would lie for instruction.
So this is the data that every teacher has
Access to.
That's great. Okay.
And one of the things going along with that is we're very transparent about that. And, every teacher can log into this and see it and use it. So even our special education teachers are pulling this data as they go through the process of designing present levels for their IEPs. Our reading specialists are accessing it. Our school psychologists access it. So it's not only just classroom teachers, it's everyone's using this.
Okay. Thank
you. You're welcome. Now, changing the other piece of data that comes in is you have to also look at this from 2 different lenses. There's a lens of looking at achievement, how well a student is doing, but also how much are they growing. So if we use the numbers Gary just shared with us, so achievement-wise, you can think of that 4th grader at a 4.7 he used. So that is an achievement level with that. But the other part is to look at the growth data. So if we use our 2.5 student, we want to see that student at least grow a year across time, because we're putting a year's worth of instruction into them. We would hope that they get to minimally a 3.5 so that they get a year's worth of growth out of that. Now, ultimately, we want to do some strategies that try and get them a little further. So if we could get to 3.75, 3.8, 3.9, that would be great, because we're closing that gap sooner with that. So there are 2 different lenses we want to go through, is that achievement, which is that single point of time. Are they getting to proficiency? That's the benchmark piece that we're doing, but also then that growth piece. And that is also a lot of times where the diagnostic will kick in and show you, are we growing? Are we filling in those skills, those potholes? And is it making a difference with that student? And is that rate of improvement catching them up? So that if we do have students who are below that, have that trajectory in the right direction. Any questions on that one? This one's a little foreign at first. All right, good on that one. So just some things, I just pulled a couple graphs to show you a little bit here. So here's a look at the achievement. So this is what achievement data could look like. This is pulled from iReady and shows you school-wide where we are. So you can see that, how many students are at mid or above grade level versus early or on grade level versus one grade level behind, two grade levels, et cetera. You can see on that bar chart at the top. But then the cool part about diagnostics is it gets into and breaks it into components for us. So then we can start to look at those domains and go, where are we having phonological awareness issues? Where are we having vocabulary issues? What's our comprehension look like? And then in the comprehension, we can break it apart between literature and informational text and go, is there a difference between that? And then we use that as a way to go, okay, how do we focus our instruction? Where are we seeing the deficit in our class? Or, hey, we're doing really well on this. I can take that unit, shrink it down, and spend more time on a different area because my class is displaying I have this domain under control. So it's a good leverage there to look at it through achievement.
Is this actual data from?
This
our
is
school?
actual data from December.
And that covers the entire elementary.
That is the entire elementary school that you see there.
Right.
So now, just to show you a little bit different, we can disaggregate this down to by grade level. So then we can start to look at this. Is there something going on in a grade level that we need to address or look at it? Or, hey, we're doing really great and we want to celebrate that. So there's ways to do that. I think one of the things, just putting my plug in a little bit here, I'm off topic, but you gave me the podium, so I'm going to take it, is if you look at our kindergarten data, where we are versus our first grade data versus our second grade data, we are in the process of we have the pilot going for full day kindergarten, and we can present that to you. We are seeing a lot of different types of data coming out of the full day kindergarten that is positive. We've seen a difference in our attendance rates. We're seeing a difference in their phonics skills and phonemic awareness skills that are coming through. It's pretty amazing to see the difference between our half-day classes and our full-day pilot. It's pretty amazing on that front. It's not on this presentation, but I wanted to put the plug in for it's very successful right now. Next is growth. So what does growth look like? So now on this particular bar chart, just to explain a little bit, you're getting accustomed to the green and the above and whatnot. Underneath, though, in the parentheses was our beginning of year. So you can see at the beginning of year, if I use just mid and above grade level, we had 6% of our students who were mid or above. In December, we grew that to 16%. So that growth grew by 10% in that time. And then you may go, but what about the yellow? Well, you actually want the yellow and reds to go down because that means kids are moving towards proficiency, which is what we want. So even in the yellow, 53% to 48%, that's going in the right direction, not the wrong direction. So that also gives us a look at how well are we doing with those students and are we moving them up during the course of this year? And lastly, the other one is how do you put this all into perspective for proficiency? So we use a quadrant for this where you actually put achievement and growth together on a quadrant. And we just went through this training in January and started looking at this. So you have on the left side there, the optimal is to be in the upper right because that is where you have high achievement and high growth going on. On the top left, you're going to have high achievement, but you're not growing quite as much as you would hope. Then on the bottom right, you're going to have high growth, you have high progress and whatnot. And the worst place to be is the lower left quadrant with that. Then what you see on the right-hand side is I gave you a snapshot. Again, this comes from iReady and gives us this data in terms of where we are. It gives you the spots of where our grade levels are. So each of the blue dots represents where our grade levels are. So we can take a look at that and go, okay, we have a lot of things going on with a lot of positive growth, which is what we saw in the growth data with that. And we're starting to make some progress towards high achievement. So we are moving, we want to be in the upper quadrants, which we are for the most part, and we want to be starting to move to the right. And if you look in that math data, we have one grade level that is already where we want them to be, high achievement and high growth, and they're taking off with that. So that also gives us an opportunity of where we see things like where do we celebrate, and then where we see something that may not make sense, going into those classrooms and going, having conversations with teachers, going, what's going on? How can we help? How can we support to make some things happen?
And I think there's a couple of things to consider when we do this. Number one is this data, this data has been available to us for the first time this year. I think sometimes, you can think you're doing the best things in the world, but if you don't have something that you're able to measure it by, you don't really know if you're hitting the targets or not. And this tells us that and allows us to then make adjustments. Some of these things, and I think back to our math program when I first arrived, and we've switched that fairly quickly. Some of these things indicate problems with resources and/or even potentially curriculum issues that are larger scale than just what's happening in a classroom. But we need to evaluate our resources. Like, for instance, if you go back to that, you don't have to go back to it, but if you think back to that one slide, you can see that vocabulary for us is a particular area that is a struggle. And when they say vocabulary, they're not talking about the memorization of specific words, although that can be helpful. They're talking about, if you see a word that you don't know, can you decode it, and can you then try to pull that apart? In other words, can you identify the root of it? And because if you can, you may know what that root means. Can you identify a specific prefix or a specific suffix that then helps you to determine what the meaning of that vocabulary word is? Things that we take for granted all the time. But sometimes our programs, and typically the basal programs, do not emphasize enough how to do that. So then you look at, okay, do we need to look at a different resource like a MegaWords, which specifically targets that skill? And then kids, you typically see good growth with that. So that sparks conversations about what supports do we need to provide teachers so that they can focus on those. But without the data, you don't have a way to really, you can guess, but you don't have a way to make those decisions. So that's been key for us, I think, this year, and sparked quite a few conversations about next steps.
Absolutely. And then obviously, what is next? Well, obviously, we're going to continue to do training and whatnot. We're growing in our capacity of data analysis and having data meetings with our teachers. We do individual meetings with teachers. We just did a round of grade level meetings. We're going back to an individual set in February on that assessment calendar. We have our next round, and then we'll have some other data meetings. So I think it's really important that we're growing our capacity and we're becoming more informed consumers of the data that we have. And then obviously that's going to transfer into the learning that we want for our students. And it really comes down to, I put that quote, it's not whether we taught it, it's whether our students are actually learning it. And the data is a way for us to measure that. All right, that's my presentation. Any questions?
Just have a question. Where are we in the process of, like, I know we purchase curriculum every couple, like, where are we in the process of, this kind of lends itself to that discussion.
Sure.
potentially.
If you recall, about 4 years ago, we added money to the budget for curriculum. The state changed their science curriculum, for instance, and we purchased some things with that recently. ELA, Language Arts, is up for curriculum writing next year with the purchase of new resources, which would be July, a year and a half. But each subject is different depending on where it falls into the cycle. That's the next big curriculum. We switched over math a few years ago. We're having some success with that. I think we probably still need to continue to look at it. Again, we have data. iReady, you showed all reading, but iReady gives us math as well. In addition to that, we're looking at a new benchmark, hopefully. The state is actually putting out a new benchmark called Firefly. We piloted it in Algebra 1 this year. It's more designed to it looks more like a PSSA test, so you kind of get better data from it. And we're hoping they develop that enough that we can utilize that in the future. The benchmarks we have are okay, but they're not, I wouldn't consider them outstanding. But anyway, ELA, July of, not this July, but the July
July of
after.
26.
They're already starting to look at some of the programs. But, and like math, I said, was a few years ago, and science was just recently.
Science was last year. This coming year, the one we're in right now is social studies, and then next year is ELA.
And every now and then, we have a department that will purchase an individual textbook for a very specific class.
Sure.
Like for instance, tonight, you'll see, I'll talk about later. Due to a strange set of circumstances, we're looking at a driver's ed resource for the remainder of the year. I think I mentioned that. But, so there are specific things that get purchased sometimes for those types of classes. But the big four would be your English, your math, your science, and we're starting to look at social studies too,
Correct.
which is up for
This year.
this July.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I had a question. So I was just wondering, why was this particular program, the iReady program, chosen as the one to collect the data?
So we went through a process last year and looked at different programs, and we ended up with a pilot of iReady, and the teachers who piloted find that it was gave us a lot of information, and it also allowed us to get some of those skill deficits in there. IXL was our previous program that we had. There was a little bit of inflation, and there was also a question of the rigor that was involved with that did it meet the standard that it was alleged to do? And there was some suspect information we had on that. And we went through the process of looking at the research on iReady and ended up that we believe this gives us a more accurate reading in terms of assessing not only where students are, but the skills that they need. The other component of iReady is it gives a ton of resources in terms of things for the teachers. So there's a lot of mini lessons in there. It also gives a lot of information in terms of we can put all our progress monitoring, which will influence how we instruct. So it's kind of like an all-in-one system that gave us everything. And we were able to combine and get rid of some different programs and merge it to an all-in-one system, which ended up being budget neutral, I would say, but got us to a place where we have more information than we ever had.
And is it the SOL program that we're using to collect data?
Is it the sole? No, but our benchmarks are through a different program that we have, so that is as different. So we do have other things that we use to, give assessments from. It's not all iReady.
And just one final question. Can you elaborate a little bit, like as a student, what the assessment looks like, from the student end? Is it all online based or?
It is all online based right now for the diagnostic portion of it. Now, when you got into some of the skills, like I mentioned, letter name and letter sound fluency for kindergarten, those are still, we're doing person to person. So we have a team that comes together, a student sits down with an adult and does those assessments. And that's a component of every grade level that they sit down with an adult. It's not all computer based. The diagnostic is, but some of the skills are not.
It kind of varies by grade level. I mean, we have the younger kids do the diagnostic. It looks a little bit different. It's a little more
Gamey.
cartoony at the
Right.
younger levels. But K1 and 2 in particular do quite a few more of the paper pencil with the letter naming, the letter sounds, pseudo words, which would be a consonant vowel consonant pattern, but they're not real words. But to practice putting those three together, and then ultimately you get into the fluency passages. Each level has its own number of words to read per minute, and then you measure accuracy and their ability to retell it as well. So there's other pieces to that give us information because, once you get into those third, fourth, fifth, sixth, there's an expectation that you can read independently. But the problem is most of the kids that, if you have a comprehension problem, a lot of times it's because they can't fluently read at that grade level. So we're putting a lot of emphasis on, and this is, again, this is a result of data that we're seeing. We have to be sending kindergartners to first grade at least with their being able to know their letter sounds. Okay, it would be great if they could use the pseudo words as well. But then in first grade, they have to be able to do that skill, and by second grade, you're starting to get into the fluency portion of it as well. But like we're starting to put together what we've asked K1 and 2 to do, because third, fourth, fifth, and sixth actually have narrowed down content that they're supposed to focus on based on what the state says. And it's very specific. Like it'll tell you which prefixes and which suffixes to teach. That's how specific it gets. K1 and 2 doesn't have that. It has broad standards. So what we've asked them to do is to sit down and take a look. For instance, second grade, take a look at third grade. Identify what you think are the most important skills so that kids can go to third grade and then be ready to master the things that they have to. So that's the process we're working on now. Then we're going to take those skills and we're going to input them into the new curriculum document so that teachers can utilize that to plan lessons. They ought to be able to look right down through. And I talked a year ago about what do we want students to learn and how do we know if they'll learn it. Well, that eligible content, what Almarode, who's the gentleman who's done the research, calls it as success criteria. Those are the same things. We want students to be able to do this, and this. And if they can demonstrate that, then they have learned this particular skill. So we're trying to tie all that together. When we get to March, we will unveil that new curricular document and in the cycle start to plug things into that document to be able to use for lesson planning. And then ultimately you align all of it. You align your curriculum with your lessons, with your assessment, and it becomes cyclical at that point.
Other questions? Does this provide a database where we can track this year over year as well?
We are inputting it into our
Okay.
data warehouse as well.
Because that's, I think that's the thing that I get most excited about, is to see what this will look like in 6 years when we see those kindergarten students up to, sixth grade. I think
That's a
gonna
great
be really
point.
great. And I think this is, so this is probably, the most excited I've been in the 5 years that I've been here, looking at this. This is exactly the kind of data that I think is digestible in what we were looking for. So I just want to say thank you, commendable. And I'm really excited to see I probably won't be here, but look what it would look like in 12 years when those kindergartners are graduating and to see what that looks like. I think this is setting us on the path to really doing some academic improvement here. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, great. Good presentations today. Public comment, there is no public comment for this evening, so we'll move immediately to establishing the agenda for next week. We'll go through each of these items and we'll identify what, if anything, needs to be on discussion agenda for next week. So just turn over to Dr. Messinger.
Clearly some things tonight that we'll be moving into discussion, but we'll get started. The first three things are our normal minutes. We'll have the numbers for the student activity count and the cash disbursement information there as well. Under budget and finance, a couple of things there. Number one is that transfer that Ms. Martin talked about. As you recall, and as you saw tonight, that the last bond is obviously less than all the other bonds. We did not split the total construction cost equally. So we knew after the sale of the building, we would have to move money over to help cover construction costs. In addition to that, there are things that were not part of the bid. I think I've talked about them a lot, although I have asked Ms. Martin to put together a list to talk a little bit about next week. She'll send it to you ahead of time, but then we'll talk publicly. But there are things such as the sidewalks that we tried to get a grant for, we did not. The asbestos removal, that's a separate contract. When we run into any sort of asbestos or anything like that in a construction project, we have a company that comes in and they get, they do their thing, but that's separate. Costs like, for instance, things that you don't think about, that we have a baseball team over here that where the batting cage used to be is now a parking lot for construction. And in order to have a batting cage, you have to relocate the batting cage, and that costs money. Things like cars backed up on Airport Road and having to change the traffic flow in the elementary school, and some costs that go along with that. So there are other additional soft costs and things that are intentionally not included, but are going to be extra. A lot of them are included on the budget sheet that we get when they start a construction project, but they're actually not part of the construction costs. For instance, furniture, things like that. So I've asked her to list those as well, but the majority of it goes for the construction. So transfer of funds from fund balance to, from assigned to the capital projects fund would be one of those items. The other one on there would be budget. And talking about we've been talking about where the board would be comfortable, and we talked about doing it a little bit differently this year. And, we've gone through the workshop, we've talked about numbers, but then the board making a decision on what that percentage would be. And it could be 0, or it could be, what's the index?
4.8.
Okay. It can't be any higher than that. But talking about that and having you give us a percentage that we will then we'll prepare a budget at that percentage. And I mean, I guess we could stop at those two and see, you want to move both, obviously 6.2, we're going to move to discussion. 6.1, you want to move to discussion or is that kind of?
Defer to the rest of the board. I mean, where's everybody else at on 6.1? Anybody want to move that to discussion? I mean, I think it's been explained to us a few times, so pretty clear to me, but if anyone would like to move it to discussion, we certainly can. Okay, hearing none, then we'll keep that on the consent. But obviously, if you look at it between now and next week, just let us know. We can move it, later. But as of now, we'll leave 6.1 on consent.
Would you like to talk about 6.2?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to. Everyone has the spreadsheet that Leanne had sent. I don't know if you all have had an opportunity to go through it and work with some numbers, but I think what we're thinking of for next week is obviously this will be on discussion, and rather than, I was talking with Dr. Messinger, and I think rather than preparing an agenda that has a set percentage, I thought what we would do is something similar to what we've done in the past, and that would be essentially take, for lack of a better term, nominations, but motions for, I mean, I'd personally like to keep that at no more than 3 numbers that we could take a vote on. So I've gone through the numbers. I kind of have a sense for where I think we could land, but I just wanted to check in with the rest of the board to see if you all have had an opportunity to work with those numbers and any insight that you have up to this point. If we can figure out before Friday what we think those numbers will be, that would be good to know, at least in advance. So I'll just turn it over to you all if you've had a chance to think about it. And no pressure. If you haven't, that's fine. I would just ask that everyone, be ready next Tuesday to come with recommendations and motions. And by all means, we can communicate, via email this week without identifying what those numbers would be. We don't want to know what the motions are, but if you have any questions, reach out to Dr. Messinger or Leanne or me.
The other thing that I asked Ms. Martin to prepare in relation to this was we want to just make sure we'll put together a list too of some of the things that we've discussed, and we have not debated which direction we'll go. When you look each year, you think, okay, can we replace this truck, or can we replace this? Or, we've talked about different positions, like Mr. Umberger talked about full day K. Can we add another full day K teacher and things like that? So things that we would have to, that we would discuss, but there's no point in discussing. It depends on where you come out with a percentage. So it's fair for you to know what is on the table, depending on what that percentage is. And we make hard decisions every year. We never get everything we think. And sometimes we don't need everything that, pops into the heads of everyone. But I think it's important to, say, okay, so let's say you decide on a 2.5, okay, does that get us, if we look at different positions, does that get us one position? Plus then we have to consider what happens with, we just heard today the governor's budget proposal, and we have an idea of what he's proposing. Now, we don't know if that's going to pass, but we have an idea at least of what he's proposing. It sounds like he's going to put a lot of the money into very specific things again, which, to use the example that I talked about, a full day K would qualify. So that helps us narrow down then which direction we want to go with things. So, but I don't think we're handcuffed necessarily. We can work with the percentage. Knowing what it is, we'll make it fit. We'll just want to make sure that here are things that we're discussing. Obviously, the more funding that comes, the easier it is to get certain things. But just want to make sure that you guys know what those are.
Great. Dr. Reese, you had a quizzical look on your face. Okay, yeah. Just to be clear, so if we want to communicate this week, it's fine to talk about the numbers. We just can't deliberate where we're going to end up with those numbers. So please take an opportunity to take a look at the numbers. And again, if you have the spreadsheet, if you go to the millage sheet, you can input on the yellow line. You can change those numbers, and then that will adjust the figures on the 10-year summary, which gives you an idea of where our ending fund balance would be, which typically is the number that I try to look at for the long-term health of the district, just to see that we maintain a healthy ending fund balance for a period of years going forward. But that's just my perspective. So any other thoughts? Input? Okay. Well, we will have this again for discussion then, and look forward to hearing discussion and where everybody's at. Okay.
Okay, moving on. 6.3, network equipment. When we purchase something through E-Rate, our E-Rate consultant, who is very knowledgeable and does a good job for us, always says we should put the E-Rate purchases up for approval from the board. In this particular case, we have some network equipment that needs replaced. You can see the total cost there. We get reimbursed that $21,000 plus through E-Rate. So that remaining amount would be what we would pay, and we will pay that out of our existing budget. But because it's an E-Rate purchase, we listed it separately for the board.
Okay. Any questions?
What type of network equipment is it?
The core network switches at the high school, some of which are at end of life, and others of which are in a questionable state due to some construction activities that have occurred.
Okay.
Okay.
Under 7, extracurricular, we do have a motion, a redesignation. Unfortunately, our bowling coach had to take a step back and has been a volunteer since January 6th. And then we took an assistant, and she is now the interim head bowling coach. Again, that's retroactive. And then we have some assistants and volunteers there. Noah Gingrich returning to us, who will be our JV baseball coach, and then a few softball volunteers and a few track and field volunteers as well. Any questions about any of those? Okay, under 8. All right, so we had 2 certified driver's ed teachers, one who left to become a principal and one who left for other personal reasons. And we do have a replacement for the phys ed portion of the person that left. However, we don't have anyone certified for driver's ed. So we do have a solution for the kids that signed up for driver's ed for the remainder of this year. Wolf Driver has a training program for students that they are willing to allow us to use, and then we will proctor that. It's a cost of $49 per student that Mrs. Bruce negotiated with them. Thank you. It is until the end of this year, and in the meantime, we are going to try our darndest to get somebody certified to teach driver's ed. And that is listed for you. We have some policies. It's my understanding that I think we found out that they were Word documents, but if you're on your phone, because a Word document, it forces you to download. It would have probably come up on the computer, but not on a phone. Changed them to PDF, so now you should be able to access those. Please take a look. If you see anything that you have questions about, holler so that we're prepared. Again, those are things that we look at. We look at a month or two in the past. And then they get sent to stock and leader and want to make sure that I'm prepared to answer any questions. However, I do have one that I want to draw your attention to, and that is policy 011. Now, this is the principles for governance and leadership from PSBA. PSBA has updated their principles for governance and leadership. Our policy had the old principles. They're now updated with the new principles. They very much would like school districts not only to change their policy to correspond to the new principles, and they would also like the board to do a resolution for these principles of government. And it reads, and I can scan it and to you, but whereas Pennsylvania school boards are committed to providing every student the opportunity to grow and achieve, and whereas our actions as elected and appointed board members ultimately have both short and long-term impact in the classroom, now therefore be it resolved that we will, and then it lists their principles for government: lead responsibly, act ethically, plan thoughtfully, evaluate continuously, communicate clearly, advocate earnestly, and govern effectively. And that's pretty much there's some bullet points that get into specific things underneath each one of those, but that's pretty much the entire resolution. So the question I have for you, as a board, are you interested in adopting this resolution? If so, we will put that on for next week.
And to put a finer point in that question too, so if we approve policy 011 as drafted, you'll look at it, says this board policy supports the principles for governance and leadership adopted by the board and signed by individual school directors. So if we don't adopt if we don't pass it as a resolution, we will have to revise the policy to be consistent with that. So to Dr. Messinger's question, I would like some feedback as to what you all think about adopting this as a resolution. It is consistent with the principles of governance and leadership that the board has previously observed. It's consistent with the training that we have. It's just a question of whether, we as a board want to adopt it as a formal resolution.
If it's consistent with what we've already been trained in and what we're looking for, I wouldn't see any reason why we shouldn't sign it and make it official.
Okay.
Right, I mean, we're just basically matching our policy with where we've been, but upgrading it.
It is generally, but I would encourage everyone to read it to
Sure.
make sure that it's a resolution that you support. Yeah.
I think they haven't come out and said this. Personal opinion, PSBA wants as many districts to do the resolution, because then when they advocate, there's a little more maybe oomph behind. We'll look at all these schools that support what we do.
Sure.
And by the way, since those were Word documents and not everybody could get them, I just suggest we just move that to discussion. For
Yeah.
next week.
I think we will. Well, I'm hearing some indication that we should at least put the resolution on as well. So we'll, if we could have a resolution drafted for vote next Tuesday to coincide with policy 011, then we'll move both of those to discussion. Any other thoughts on the other policies? Any questions regarding the other policies that we have posted? We are getting to the point now, fortunately, with our board policies that we are closing in and finalizing a full policy packet, which had not been done in some cases for what, 1987. We have now at the point where we have completed that process, and so now we're starting over with the zeros, and it's a lot of cleanup, and it's a lot of revisions recommended from PSBA. So a lot of these new policies are really sort of minor revisions, but if you have any questions at all, let us know. And if anyone wants to move any of these particular policies to discussion, please speak up. Otherwise, we'll just move 011 and the resolution. Okay, and I think that's the course of action we'll do. Great.
Okay, and then finally, employment items. We have two employments, moving Riley Cox from substitute to a paraprofessional, Chloe Howard for a general education aide. We also have two mentors that are listed there for you. We have two folks in terms of resignation. One of them is a retirement. You can see their letter under your content. However, the public is just teacher retirement. And then we have Katie Butler, who is, I know, accepting a position about 5 minutes from her home, which kudos to her for, it's nice to live 5 minutes from your, it's bad too sometimes to live 5 minutes from your home, but, or work 5 minutes from your home. But there's also a substitute list there for you. I will draw your attention, if you look at that document, that we do have one person who holds another position in the district. We just put a clerical note there to make sure that they are paid appropriately for one position versus if they are working in a custodial position. So it's not going to be like an overtime situation. It's going to be two separate rates for two different jobs. But they were interested in doing some custodial work for us.
Okay. Any questions? Discussion?
So I had a question about the information that you sent us about the charter school slush fund. Just any follow-up on that?
Sure. So Dr. Messinger this week, or I guess it was last week, sent, I don't want to mess it up, but there's a watchdog organization, I guess, for lack of a better term, that has gotten the right to know data from, it was just the one charter school, correct? Yes. So it was the right to know data. They had filed right to know, got some information. It's pretty extensive. It lists out all of the expenses of this large charter school. And so the question that I had posed to you all this week was, is this something that we would like to pursue as a resolution? And there's really a couple of angles that we can do there. We can reach out to our legislators to have them, encourage them to take whatever action is being proposed, but or we can just sign a resolution. We can do both. We can, as a board, draft a resolution regarding what the recommendation was there, and I don't have it in front of me, so I can't speak really intelligently to it, but I would encourage everybody to take a look at it. I pulled up the data. I looked at the spreadsheet. Essentially, what this organization is doing is spelling out where taxpayer funds are going in support of this individual charter school. And I think it's pretty eye-opening. It reveals a lot. There's a lot that's redacted. That is obviously a legal question as to how and why those things are redacted. But I would just encourage everybody to take a look at it. It's not something we have to do Tuesday. Obviously, we've got some time here, but we know that charter school reform has been something that this board has advocated for. And I do think that to the extent we would like to move forward, what they have provided gives a good basis for us to take some formal steps. So does that help? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but I would encourage everybody to dig through it. I went through it, the spreadsheet, looked at all of the categories of expenses, the amount of money that is being spent on those expenses, and it is very eye-opening. So, And we can talk about it in committee next month as well. Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay. I just want to, did you have something, Dr. Messinger? Okay. Okay, yep. Go ahead. You wanna look in?
Nothing, yeah, just regular meeting next week and then some dates between now and the next meeting.
Okay, last thing, before we adjourn, I just want to take a step back on the budget thing and just to make sure we're very clear and being very careful with this. Here's what I'm going to propose for this week. If you have an idea of a target millage increase that you're thinking of, I think the best approach would be for you to individually contact Gary and perhaps Leanne to see what impact that would have on the budget so that you can understand that individually. Let's avoid having a board-wide conversation just to make sure that we're in the clear. But whatever questions you have for data, please direct those to the administration. They'll be able to answer those questions, and then that'll allow you to come prepared next Tuesday without us risking any sort of deliberation in advance. Make sense? Any questions regarding that?
I'm just asking for clarification. You want it sent to one or the other
Uh,
or
Well,
both?
that's up to them.
Are you, it doesn't matter. She'll come running to me or I'll go running to her.
I'll send it to both of you. Okay.
I would say if
We're
you
not far.
if you communicate to Leanne, please copy Gary. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Anything else for the group? All right. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Go Birds.
Yeah. Well, I'm putting the money on them.